This is a sock yarn, but this could be too. And in fact, let's look at this. They're all very different yarns because it turns out sock yarn is about more than just how thick the yarn is. Welcome back to the Apiary, a knitting podcast. If we haven't met yet, my name is Lauren. I design accessory knitting patterns with a special focus on socks. And I frequently get people asking me for recommendations for my favorite sock yarns. And while I do have some favorites, and I will link to one of my guides down below in the description, I actually think a sock yarn is an amorphous concept. So in today's episode, I'm going to walk you through all the things that I think about when I'm deciding whether or not to knit socks with a particular yarn. Now, before you even start shopping for a sock yarn, you need to first think about how you plan to use those socks. And that's because the use scenario for that pair of socks is going to affect which yarns will be a good fit for it and which yarns will not. A pair of socks that are meant for lounging at home on a chilly night on the sofa can be significantly different from a pair of socks that you are planning to wear every single day in a pair of hiking boots. So step one in this process is to think about how you plan to use the socks you're going to knit. So here's an example. I live in Southern California and it's pretty warm here most of the year. Even on the chilly days, it's really not that cold. So I'm frequently wearing sandals or ballet flats or loafers, and you don't really wear socks with any of those. That means that for me, my socks are primarily used for snuggling up at home when I'm chilly, or occasionally wearing inside boots when it's rainy, or with sandals when I'm going out at night and I just want an extra cozy layer. Do not make fun of me for wearing Birkenstocks and socks. It's one of the best way to show off my hand knit socks, and I will not apologize for it. Now, because my socks tend to get pretty light wear, I can choose more fragile yarns for my socks. If I were planning to consistently wear them inside boots or do lots of mileage on them, for example, if I had to walk 5 miles a day, I would need to choose a more durable sock yarn. We'll get into what makes a durable versus less durable sock yarn in a few moments. So step one of this process is to think about how you plan to use your socks. Are you going to wear them in shoes a lot? Do your feet get sweaty a lot? Is it going to be really hot where you wear them or really cold where you wear them? That is going to affect the kind of yarn that you're going to want to use for your socks. Ultimately, there is no perfect sock yarn for every single sock and every use scenario, so you're going to have to exercise some discretion here. Step two in the process is to decide what thickness of yarn you want to use. Most yarn that is marketed as sock yarn, labeled as sock yarn, sold as sock yarn is going to be an international weight category number 2. Here in the US, that thickness of yarn is commonly known as fingering weight yarn. Elsewhere, it can be known as 4-ply in other English-speaking countries. Now, under normal sock knitting circumstances, this yarn is going to give you about 7 to 8, maybe 9 stitches per inch, and you're going to get about 400 to 450 yards of yarn per 3.5 ounces or 100 grams. This yarn is going to get you a comparatively lightweight fabric. It is going to be closer in thickness to kind of a thicker store-bought athletic sock. It doesn't add a ton of bulk, which makes it ideal for wearing inside of shoes that are already kind of close-fitting. If you like using sock patterns, the majority of sock patterns are also designed for this weight yarn. The thing is, that's not the only weight of yarn that you can use to knit really nice, comfortable socks. And in fact, depending on where you are and what scenario you're going to be using these socks in, that may be too thin for you. So here are a couple examples. I have a few pairs of socks that I have knit in sport weight yarn at a looser gauge, just for snuggling up at home. Here's a pair of those socks compared to one of my regular pairs of socks using fingering weight yarn and my normal needle size. And you can see that the gauge here is much looser. You can really see that in the foot. See, there's the gauge on that one versus the gauge on this one. This sock is not going to be as durable if I wear it inside a shoe. But for snuggling up at home on the couch on a chilly night when I'm reading a book and I'm having a big mug of tea, it's perfect. You can absolutely use sport weight yarn or DK weight yarn or worsted weight yarn to knit socks for everyday wear, but you should do it at a tighter gauge so that it's more durable. Now, when we get up into DK weight and worsted weight yarns, these are yarns that are particularly well suited for either knitting slipper socks or for people who live in really, really cold places and who like to double up on layers of socks. So I have talked to knitters who live in really far north Scandinavia and the Canadian prairies where it gets just really, 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 really cold, like cold enough that my wimpy SoCal self can't even really truly comprehend that level of cold. And they have told me that what they like to do on the coldest days when they're going outside is they wear an inner layer of socks that are a little thinner, and then they put on a super thick outer layer of socks before they put on their boots. So if you live somewhere like that, a worsted weight sock layered over an inner sock might be something you want to consider. Okay, so if the thickness of the yarn doesn't determine whether it's a sock yarn, what does? Well, there are a few other factors we need to consider. One thing you want to think about is how absorbent your sock yarn's fiber is. That's because of kind of two separate factors. The first is feet sweat. And that's normal, right? That's fine. That's just part of living in this physical, corporeal form. Bodies do things, and that's whatever. The other thing is, factor number 2, is that when you are wearing your socks, it is not uncommon for those socks to get wet in other ways. If you step in a puddle, or you get some snow inside your boots and then that snow melts, your socks are going to get wet. So the ideal sock yarn, the sock yarn that is going to perform the best, is a sock yarn that will wick away sweat, pull the moisture away from your feet, and let that moisture evaporate as quickly as possible. That will keep your feet dry, which will in turn keep them warm. And if you're like me and you've stepped in a puddle in your tennis shoes wearing, regular gym socks and then gone around all day with squelchy feet, well, you know how terribly uncomfortable that is. So you want a sock yarn that is not going to make that happen. Option number 1, and my personal favorite for knitting socks, it's almost the only fiber I ever use for knitting socks, is wool. Wool is a really fantastic fiber because it absorbs sweat and wicks it away. And so it dries relatively quickly compared to some other fibers. It's also pretty comfy and insulating, but breathable. And I have read several sources indicating that wool has some natural antimicrobial properties, which means that it will help combat any unpleasant odors from sweaty feet. Now, there may be reasons that you don't want to use wool. Either you have a wool sensitivity, or maybe you don't use animal fibers in your crafting. In that case, there are still some other options. Option number 1 is cotton. Cotton is a little less ideal than wool because while it is still absorbent, it doesn't dry as quickly as wool does. It tends to hold on to that moisture, and so it's going to keep the moisture in your sock. Cotton also has less memory, so when the leg stretches out, it's less likely to go back into shape against your ankle, which means it's more likely to stretch or droop over time. Some vegan sock yarns have, cotton or linen or silk mixed with a little bit of elastic, and that helps preserve the shape a little bit. The third option is synthetic fibers, most commonly either nylon or acrylic. And nylon and acrylic sock yarns can be appealing because generally they're going to be pretty affordable. But in terms of functionality, I think they're a really poor choice for knitting socks. And here's why. Nylon and acrylic tend to have very low absorbency, which means that if your feet sweat or you step in a puddle, that's it, you're wet. And the sock is not going to wick away that moisture. You're just going to be sitting in that moisture. They also have almost no memory, which means that like cotton, they are going to start drooping and stretching over time. There are some fibers that are really lovely and soft and appealing that I would absolutely recommend against using in your socks. One is pure linen and its cousin pure silk. These two fibers behave very similarly in ways that are not good for sock knitting. They don't stretch very well and they don't bounce back into shape very well. That means that these fibers are not going to do a good job of stretching over your feet and your ankle as you put them on and then conforming back down to the shape of your body and then staying that way. I also wouldn't recommend pure cashmere for your socks. It is beautiful. It is so soft, but it's not very sturdy. And that means that you are going to sprout holes in those socks so much more quickly than you would with another fiber. All right, now that we have evaluated the moisture wicking properties of the yarn you're planning to use, let's take a look at the durability factor of the yarn you're planning to use. There are a few elements that affect a yarn's durability, and one is the actual fiber in the yarn itself. Now, this is where things get a little bit messy. If you go into any of the big sock knitter groups on Ravelry or Facebook and you ask them, do I need to use sock yarn with nylon in it for durability? You are going to get 10 different answers from 10 different knitters who all have very, very strong opinions about it. There are some sock knitters who will swear up and down and around in a circle that pure wool with no nylon in it is too fragile, it's going to fall apart, you may as well not knit the sock in the first place. There are other knitters who will tell you that pure wool is just fine, you do not need nylon, and in fact, nylon helps prevent the natural felting process that makes your socks more durable at wear points. The thing is, as with any random gathering of anecdotes from a group of strangers on the internet, there's not really a reliable way to control for all of the different variables in people's experiences. Different people knit different socks at different gauges on different feet for different purposes with different wear patterns. They launder their socks differently, they store their socks differently, and they expect different things from their socks. Another factor is that different wools from different breeds of sheep are going to wear differently. Some sheep's wool are very sturdy and very durable. Others are more delicate. As for me, most of my socks I knit tend to have about 20% nylon in it, and the rest is various types of wool. I don't really find much of a difference between them, but again, I am a relatively light user of my socks. I'm not putting them through really hard wear and tear. If I were hiking the Appalachian Trail, I might have different thoughts on it. I don't know. Stay tuned. The other factor that will significantly affect the durability of your yarn is its construction, how the yarn itself is spun up. If you've ever been down to a working harbor and you've seen, big fishing boats coming in and mooring up at the docks, take a close look at those ropes. I can guarantee you that the ropes that they are tying their boats up with have lots and lots and lots of strands all twisted up together in that rope. And that's because the more strands there are in the rope, the stronger that rope is going to be. The same theory applies to yarn. And that means that while that single ply yarn looks so beautiful in the skein and feels so soft in your hands, I beg of you, please, for the love of all that is good, do not use that yarn to knit socks. It is almost guaranteed to be too delicate for ordinary wear and tear. The very best yarns for knitting socks, the ones that I love the most, are the ones that have 4 plies all twisted around each other. Hence the name for sock knitting yarn in some English-speaking countries. 4-ply yarn has 4 thin, delicate little plies twisted around each other, and it makes very good, very sturdy sock yarn. Most sock knitting yarns that are currently available tend to have 2 or 3 plies, and that's fine. Those will also wear okay, but the 4-ply yarns, gorgeous. Those will last. Now, there are other factors affecting the durability of your sock, such as the gauge at which you knit your sock and particular unique wear patterns you have, and also the condition of your feet. But that's kind of a topic for a different video. So again, remember, there is no perfect sock yarn for every sock knitting scenario. Some sock yarns are going to be great for one scenario. Some are going to be great for another scenario. So a sock yarn can be a great sock yarn even if it's not labeled sock yarn. A sock yarn can be labeled sock yarn and not be a good sock yarn. Using these criteria, though, will help you evaluate the yarn that you're looking at and decide whether it is a good fit for your specific use. If you have other questions about how to pick a good yarn for knitting your socks, feel free to drop them down in the comments below. I love answering questions and helping knitters out anytime I can. Otherwise, thanks for being here, and I'll see you next episode.